I'm Kip Brunder, Blue Earth County Commissioner, standing in front of the beautiful historic courthouse. This historic courthouse still is a vital part of our operations after 120 years.
From its scenic river valley to its fruitful agricultural land, Blue Earth County has proved to be an exceptional settlement for early pioneers and today's residents alike. But what was once purely a functional source of life and sustainability has now become a regional hub for retail, education, and health care in south-central Minnesota. Blue Earth County was established in 1853. Now that's 5 years before Minnesota achieved statehood. Today, the county's 764 square miles encompass 11 cities and 23 townships. Blue Earth County boasts more river miles than any other county in the state, with 3 major waterways meeting up with the Minnesota River. These are the Blue Earth, Le Sueur, and Watonwan rivers. This region, rich in history and character, can be exemplified by the Mankato landscape, defined by the outline of the Blue Earth County Historic Courthouse. The Blue Earth County Courthouse has become an icon of the area, standing the test of time since its construction in 1889. In 2009, the state court system left the historic courthouse and relocated to the new Justice Center, along with all other criminal justice departments, including Sheriff's Office, jail, county attorney, and probation offices. Also under the jurisdiction of the county is the Blue Earth County Library, which maintains popularity with people of all ages by offering programs for children, adults, and seniors. The Public Works Department helps maintain Blue Earth County's 3 campgrounds and numerous parks and recreation areas. They also perform services that make our lives easier, including snow plowing, road and bridge construction, and inspection. The Blue Earth County Government Center houses the county's largest department, Human Services. Some areas of this department include financial assistance, child protection, community health, supportive housing, and mental health. Other county offices in the Government Center include environmental services, veteran services, information technology, elections, and a license center. Today, the historic courthouse is occupied by the Board of Commissioners, Administration, Finance, and Physical Plant. When the court system left, Taxpayer Services and the University of Minnesota's Extension Office were also able to move into the courthouse. The dream of Mankato becoming county seat began long before the current courthouse's groundbreaking. Blue Earth County was founded in 1853 by the Minnesota Territorial Legislature. At the time, 3 men were appointed commissioners: James Hanna, a prominent merchant in Mankato, Frank Hinckley, and J.W. Babcock. Babcock was one of the first quarrymen, the oldest industry in Mankato. Coincidentally, the exterior of historic courthouse is constructed entirely of Mankato Kasota stone, harvested from local quarries. And if you look in Mankato, you'll find a good many other buildings of that type of stone. During the county's first 3 years, there were no buildings for government use. Land was surveyed for a courthouse in 1854, but it sat untouched for 2 years, with the exception of a few farm animals that were kept penned up on the property. Finally, in 1856, the construction of a log jail and a 1-story house for the sheriff began, and this location was on Walnut Street and South 4th Street. These two buildings cost a combined $900 and were completed the following year. Soon after that, a stone building was constructed at the corner of Hickory and 4th Streets for the Register of Deeds. This building came to be known as the Courthouse. The farm animals, however, were not so quick to vacate their land, and the courthouse square had to be enclosed by a board fence to keep these animals off the property. Often the sheriff was called in to keep the block free of stray horses, cattle, sheep, and pigs. The most notorious occurrence in this old stone courthouse was following the Great Dakota Conflict of 1862. It was there that a military commission tried 392 Dakota warriors as war criminals over the course of 6 weeks, and rather quick trials, some lasting 5 minutes. The military court sentenced 303 Dakota prisoners to death by hanging. It was only by the intervention of President Lincoln that 265 of these men were saved from the gallows. Lincoln authorized the execution of the remaining 38 Dakota who were hung in unison on December 26, 1862 in Mankato. Incidentally, that's the largest mass execution in the history of the United States. In 1861, troubles that would continue to haunt Blue Earth County first surfaced when a bill was introduced in the state legislature to relocate county seat and Garden City. The bill failed, and in 1867, the legislature authorized $10,000 in bonds for a new jail. Since Garden City had already been awarded permanent location for the county fair, they made a plea to get the courthouse as well, and therefore become the county seat. Mankato won the new jail site to the dismay of Garden City. A new 2-story building with a basement was built for the jail, sheriff's quarters, and the county's first official courtroom. The log jail and frame house were torn down, but the old stone courthouse remained and was enlarged to accommodate officials. However, the additional space proved insufficient, and over the next decade, Mankato citizens began to feel that the shabby buildings were a disgrace to their county. So in 1877, the grand jury passed a resolution recommending the construction of a new building. Though no further action was taken for 7 years, when adding to the citizens' shame, Stephen Lamb returned from a regional visit and reported that he'd been strongly impressed by municipal architecture in other towns. Residents worried that the rundown buildings would give visitors the impression that Blue Earth County was poverty-stricken and lacking in enterprise. With this renewed public interest, the legislature authorized $75,000 in bonds for a new courthouse in 1887, pending ratification by the voters. The vote to approve the bonds took place in May of 1885, but failed. Regardless, commissioners proceeded, undaunted by the will of the voters. Instead of the bonds, they passed a levy and went ahead with the construction plan for a Mankato courthouse, fueling controversy between the two towns. But Garden City residents weren't the only ones to oppose the commissioners' blatant disregard of election results. In addition, commissioners levied $18,000 worth of taxes, enraging the rural public who saw the plans as a way for Mankato to profit at the expense of the entire county, both in terms of reputation and commerce. Some viewed the new courthouse as an extravagance and an unnecessary one, as residents and farmers were recovering from a big financial crash in 1873 and grasshopper plagues several years in this area. Separate meetings were held in 1886 by both the opposition and those who supported the courthouse. But no agreements were reached, and the bitter feud continued. Despite the disagreement, a judge sided with the commissioners in favor of the Mankato location and granted them $23,000 in bonds to contract and additional smaller levies each year. Later, another $30,000 in bonds was granted to complete the courthouse. Legal action ensued, and the opposition hired lawyer Lauren Cray of Lake Crystal, who filed an injunction to stop construction of the courthouse. However, the public did eventually vote for Mankato as the location of the new courthouse, though it only passed by 53 votes. The new courthouse on South Fifth Street was finished on October 1st, 1889, 35 years after the land was surveyed, and almost $50,000 over its original budget of $75,000. County officials moved in 4 days later, foregoing a dedication ceremony in an attempt to quiet the tumultuous controversy. It wasn't until 100 years later that the courthouse was actually formally dedicated. By construction's end, there had been 2 lawsuits, one against the commissioners by those opposed to the final location, who claimed that they had been sold out to those city folks, and one against the contractors by the commissioners because of shabby building stones and foundations. Towering high above the city is the copper statue of Lady Justice, an iconic symbol of the justice system. The origin of this character comes from the Greek goddess of justice, Themis, or as she is known in Latin, Justitia. When you see Lady Justice on any courthouse in the nation, she is depicted carrying the sword of authority in one hand and the scales of justice in the other, which she holds high above her. Usually, Lady Justice is blindfolded to signify that justice is impartial, but our statue likely depicts a westernized version of this goddess. Not only is she lacking the blindfold, but her eyes are open, and she seems to be looking over the beautiful Minnesota River Valley. Our Lady Justice, if you include her pedestal, measures 38 feet high and weighs an incredible 10,000 pounds. But time and the elements had taken their toll on the statue. In 1898, Lady Justice lost her scales for the first time to high winds. They were blown off. The scales were replaced several years later, only to fall again in 1909. But the cause of this fall was much more unclear. Some guessed that copper had come loose at the holding joint. Some blamed the wind again. Others speculated they were manually taken down due to their instability. But arguably, the most intriguing theory was the disappearance of the scales in 1909. This refers to the legend of one Grace Ledbetter. Mrs. Ledbetter was notoriously tried for the murder of her husband, whose body had been buried on their farm just a few miles north of Mankato. Frank Smith, the hired man on the farm, was found guilty of the gruesome murder. And though he confessed to the crime, he was also said to have implicated Mrs. Ledbetter, as well as her sister and brother-in-law. In Mr. Smith's account of the crime, Mrs. Ledbetter killed her sleeping husband with an axe, and Mr. Smith helped bury the body. While Frank Smith would spend the rest of his life in jail, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty for Grace Ledbetter, much to the dismay of the townspeople who had already formed a guilty judgment in their own minds. The legend states that at the moment the not guilty verdict was announced, Lady Justice's scales tipped, fell, and went missing, never to be found. And it was 64 years before new scales were put up in 1975. This time, a metal pipe was run through the statue to permanently attach the scales to her hand. After 100 years in the elements, Lady Justice received a well-deserved cleaning in 1990 when the tower was renovated. The statue was taken down to a local company, Schwickert's on Poplar Street, for restoration, reinforcement, and repair. Her surface was cleaned, and for a while, the statue shone with a beautiful red copper color. However, since then she has regained her green verdigris, the natural form that copper takes over a long time in the elements. The statue's wounds were repaired, which included a large gouge in her forearm and a rip in her dress. Partly because of the rip, pigeons had got underneath her skirt and deposited 3 feet of solid droppings at the statue's base. This was cleaned out and a bird screen was put in place to stop this problem from reoccurring. At least 10 bullet holes were also needed to be repaired in the statue. Now these were the result of a 1988 shooting by a mentally unstable man. Lady Justice was returned to her rightful place atop the courthouse on February 22, 1991. During Lady Justice's sabbatical, there was an effort to add 4 clocks to the tower of the courthouse. Bids had been received from companies over the years, and nearly $20,000 was set aside for the project. More than $13,000 of that was raised from private donations. However, there was a hurdle to get over before the clocks could be installed. The Minnesota Historical Society intervened, since this was a building listed on the National Registry of Historic Buildings, and told the county that they must be sure that the original drawing of the courthouse showed a provision for clocks. Because the original look of the historical building must be preserved, a clock had to be intended for the building. Fortunately, original sketches were unearthed showing clock faces, and the installation eventually went ahead as planned. The clock now plays songs 3 times a day and chimes hourly between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. The clock and newly refurbished tower were dedicated on June 25, 1991. Due to accessibility problems, the clock tower is not open to the public. A person would have to climb a ladder and travel through the ductwork in the attic in order to reach it. The exterior of Blue Earth County Historical Courthouse is modeled in a French-Italian Renaissance fashion. Characteristic of this style are the broad Roman arches, distinctive capitals adorning it. The back entrance on 5th Street is mostly used by the public now. However, the historically intended main entrance is the grand staircase entrance overlooking the hill toward 4th Street. On the front entrance, we can see fine architecture featuring elaborate sculptures and columns typical of the 19th century. County government responsibilities have grown since 1889, when the building was first occupied, and now there are 14 Blue Earth County departments, 5 of which remain in the historic courthouse. The finance and physical plant offices are in the basement level or garden level of the courthouse. The entire first floor houses taxpayer services, including property assessment tax collection, abstract certificates for registered land, mapping, ditch management, and passports. A portion of the first floor is open to the public and houses present-day land records and public research areas. This includes plats of subdivisions, deed, mortgage, probate, and corporation book dating from 1856. The public can search tract indexes of recorded documents, microfilm, and books containing certificates to titles. There's also a vault in which the county used to store various valuables. The first floor was formerly occupied by administration. The main taxpayer services window and office area was once the county boardroom, which is now upstairs. Across the hallway is where court administration used to be located. Some people might be familiar with the window. It's where you used to come to pay fines and conduct other court-related business. Courts were taken over by the state in 2000 and are no longer part of the county. However, the courts work closely with the sheriff's office, county attorney's office, and the corrections department, which are all entities of the county and reside in the new Justice Center. The second floor of the courthouse used to include 3 courtrooms, one large, one medium, and one small. The small courtroom doesn't have much room for public attendance, but they used to hold trials here involving such things as probate. But the most notable feature of the small courtroom is the one and only remaining fireplace from the original building. There were once 16 fireplaces used to heat the entire structure before central heating was installed. In the remaining fireplace, you can see the fine tile work and beautiful wood carving. The small courtroom is dedicated as a conference room for the Board of Commissioners. Most trials, including the infamous Ledbetter trial, were held in the large courtroom. It is now used by the Board of Commissioners for meetings. Blue Earth County is divided into 5 equal population districts, each represented by 1 commissioner elected by the district's citizens. Commissioners are elected every 4 years unless there is a special circumstance, such as a commissioner retiring. The 5 county commissioners meet at least 2 or 3 times a month on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock to make decisions and formulate policy for the county. One of the commissioners' toughest jobs is making budgeting decisions. These meetings are open to the public. In the former chamber of George Norbert Smith, you can see the original woodwork in the trim and the bookcases that line the walls. And incidentally, you get an excellent view of the river valley. The second floor now houses administration, including the county administrator's office and commissioner's offices. One office still shows the original ceiling height. The courthouse was constructed originally as a 2-story building with high ceilings and ornate woodwork, which is still visible. If you envision all the rooms of the courthouse to be as tall and elaborate, you can imagine how grand the building was in earlier years. The courthouse's 3rd floor now includes the University of Minnesota's extension offices, which encompass agriculture, 4-H, youth development, nutrition education, horticulture, and other miscellaneous program areas. The former 3rd floor courtroom is now a conference room for special events and meetings. As you can see, even with the courts no longer presiding in the courthouse, the building is still very active. And even though the facility has been used for more than 100 years, it is still considered within the top 25% of all energy-efficient buildings in the nation and holds the Distinguished Energy Star Award. The Blue Earth County Historic Courthouse has seen a multitude of people from all walks of life come through its doors throughout the years. It has stood up through good times and tumultuous times, but it will always remain an iconic landmark of Blue Earth County. Thank you.